Hello everybody, it's Richard Bugler from Albert Goodman Chartered Accountants, and I've been listening intently on the budget this afternoon. I'm just very pleased to pass on a few thoughts. The Chancellor started off by giving us a bit of a warning really that there were turbulent times ahead, so I think we were all fearing the worst to come, but actually probably what he delivered was maybe not as bad as we expected in a few areas. He set the scene by saying that the UK was growing well, but actually not as well as he budgeted, and there was a downgrading in the forecast for growth, and I think we're looking at only a 2% growth for each of the next 4 years, which is still, I believe, one of the best in all the developed economies, but less than his budgeted growth. One thing he made which was quite interesting was the OBR's forecasts were predicated on the basis that we stay within the EU, and we all know that the Chancellor is obviously pro-EU, so it's quite interesting that he gave that quite a big plug during his speech today. What he did say, in order to meet our surplus, which is forecast in 2019-20, was that we needed to do two things. We needed to make some more cuts, and I think he announced, cuts in spending of about £3.5 billion, and he also announced some cuts in some tax avoidance schemes that raised about £10 billion. So I think his view would be if he makes the cuts and he makes those savings in tax avoidance, we should meet our budget in 2019-20. But the fact is he has downgraded his forecast and he didn't meet his target, so obviously that was something that the opposition jumped on. In terms of the person in the street, I think there was some good news by and large. Good to hear that fuel duty was frozen with the lower fuel prices at the pumps. I think we all feared that the fuel duty would be increased, but that stayed the same for another, I think, the 6th year now. No increase in duties on beer and cider, so our brewers and cider producers locally will be very pleased to hear that. I think the usual above inflationary increases on cigarettes, etc., but I think that's not unusual. Some good news on the personal allowance and the higher rate band. The personal allowance will go up to £11,500 in April 2017, and the level at which people pay higher rate tax will increase to £45,000, so some welcome increases there. Interesting also, he reduced capital gains tax, which caused a bit of a stir, as that's often seen as a bit of a sort of benefit the more wealthy, and that's going to be reduced from 28% to 20% for higher rate payers and from 18% to 10% for low rate payers. But interesting enough, that does not apply to residential property, so I'm afraid landlords or second homers won't benefit from those reductions. Probably the most notable and the headline grabber, I think, was some of the benefits for savers. He particularly wanted to help younger savers. We already know about the Help to Buy scheme, which helps young people get on the housing market, but he introduced what he referred to as a lifetime ISA, which is really something that follows on from that first scheme, helping those between the age of 40 and 50, and broadly speaking, apparently, for every £4, or for every £3 that you pay in, the government will top it up by £1. So good news for some savers there, and also good news for some of the people approaching pension age, and which few of us feared that the tax-free lump sum would be going, but actually that was announced that would stay. So good news for those approaching pension age. In terms of business, there was some pretty good response, some pretty good feedback, in that there was an attack on sort of global tax avoidance, and that was anticipated to raise about £9 billion, and all of that money would go to help smaller businesses. And good news to hear that the rate of corporation tax will reduce from 20% to 17% in April 2020, so good news there. And I think in terms of our local businesses, particularly those in the high street, some good news on small business rates relief, whereby the threshold at which that kicks in is going up from £6,000 to £15,000. So really good news for a lot of small businesses in the high street. And what the Chancellor says was about 600,000 businesses in the UK will not pay any business rates now. So good news. And also some good news on the Class 2 national insurance, which is aimed at the self-employed people. That'll also be abolished shortly as well. So good to see the back of that slightly odd tax. One or two other sort of slightly quirky things. Quite a few people are expecting a rise in insurance premium tax. That did come, but it only came at 0.5%, and it was said that that money would be earmarked for flood defences. That was anticipated to raise about 700 million. Quite an interesting, a bit of a sort of rabbit out the bag moment was when he announced the sugar levy, which is going to be a levy on the sugary drinks made by large producers, not small producers, and that's anticipated to raise about 520 million, and that money will be going to provide funding for sport in primary schools, and apparently funding towards increasing the working day in secondary schools. Quite a bit of announcement on investment and infrastructure, an awful lot of discussions about the Northern Powerhouse, but I'm afraid I didn't catch anything in terms of particular projects in the southwest, so that was a bit of a disappointment there really. And also there was an announcement of extra funding, and it was very much the Chancellor's ambition that all schools would either be an academy or be in the process of being an academy by 2022. I think that's probably sums up the budget as best I can. I think there were sort of winners and losers, but I think probably on balance, for most people in the street and most small business owners, it could have been a lot worse. Thank you.